He adds a safe zone has been created and Turkey's combat missions against Kurdish forces have ended. Also, officials say U.S. troops removed from Syria will remain in Iraq for the next 4 weeks. Hong Kong's government officially has withdrawn an unpopular extradition bill. The proposal sparked months of pro-democracy protests. Demonstrators feared the plan would impede religious freedom. It's unclear whether the formal withdrawal will end the protests. Pope Francis says the Catholic Church must always be open and welcoming. At his weekly talk to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father compares the Church to a tent because it's capable of widening its space to include everyone. I'm Wyatt Goolsby with EWTN News Nightly. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and join us tonight.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line. With today's host, Father Mitch Pacwa. In North America, call toll-free 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000 or send an email to openline@ewtn.com.
Well, it's great to be with you all. Father Mitch Pacwa. Jack is away, so this mouse is going to play. Again, we want you to call in your questions. It's 1-833-288-EWTN, which adds up in numbers to 1-833-288-3986. Or if you are outside North America, you can call 1-205-271-2985. And if you call from outside North America, Charles will just push you right up. You're producing, aren't you? Yeah, see, he's the producer. I still learn what these people have to do. But they'll push you right up to the front because you're special. All right, let us now go over to some emails. One is from Zach. Dear Father Mitch, was Jesus ever happy? Was his happiness redemptive or was it meaningless? Well, one of the problems is with the word happy. It has a different nuance in Hebrew than it does in English. In English, it would be, it tends to be sort of the enjoyment of things, kind of a light, easy enjoyment, and you're happy about the way a baseball game turned out. And unless you're from Washington or Houston, it doesn't destroy your life. But, of course, they're in the World Series. And I hope they both win. But I hope Houston wins more. But be that as it may, use happiness as for delight. In the Bible, the words ashrei, or and the Greek equivalents for it, and there are a couple, those terms are also the words translated as blessed. So in the Beatitudes, you could use the word happy, that would be okay, but again, in English, that doesn't give the same nuance as blessed. And did Christ experience the blessedness of this life? Absolutely. Was it redemptive? Of course. All that he did was redemptive. His saving death paid the price for our sins, but his whole human life was very much a redemptive. And so, yes, it was meaningful and very important. So we we're happy to have that. And, we also want that blessedness, not a mere, again, with the English nuance of happy being, happy-go-lucky, things like that. But those are fine. but they come and go. They tend the English. That's it. The English nuance tends to be a little bit more focused on the emotional. The Hebrew and Greek notion of blessed emphasizes the experience in relationship to God who gives us the blessing. That would be a good way to think about it. All right. And here from Nick, I was meditating upon the Eucharist recently and had a thought come. Why do we not say that the sacred host contains the spirit of the man Jesus? Paul states that we as mankind, have a body, soul, and spirit in the Epistle to the Thessalonians. What's the difference between our soul and our spirit, and how come the church doesn't say body, blood, soul, spirit, and divinity when speaking of the sacrament? Many thanks for all you guys do. Well, Nick, the reason is that while St. Paul makes that distinction, and it makes good sense in Greek, it doesn't make as much of a difference in English and some of the other languages. Think about what the word was. The word for soul that he used was psyche, like we get psychology. And spirit is pneuma, and then, of course, soma is body. And this distinction between psyche and pneuma, like a pneumatic drill, that's why pneumatic drill begins with a P, but we tend not to say the P. Pneumatikos would be Greek, but which means that it's the force of wind that makes pneumatic drill work, because pneuma means wind as well as spirit. And so we tend not to distinguish spirit and soul as much as the Greeks did. And as a matter of fact, the study of psychology is understanding the emotions and thoughts and memories of people. And that's sort of what's meant by psyche or psyche. And pneuma refers to the spirit, that which touches God, where God enters into a person. And in general, in Latin, anima tends to have that sense of being that aspect of the human that God touches. He comes to our soul. And so they sort of collapse the two concepts of soul and psyche into the one word of anima. And that's why you don't see that distinction. And then it says, this is from Catherine, why do we have to go to confession when in the Bible it states that all you have to do is ask God to forgive you? Where is the verse, Catherine, where it says all you have to do is ask God to forgive you? There's no verse that says that. And you're sort of creating a false memory of something that's just not there. It doesn't say all you have to do is ask God to forgive you. It's not there. That's why we do read that Jesus said to his disciples, whosever sins you all forgive, they are forgiven. Whoever sins you retain, they are retained. How would one of the disciples or their successors, the bishops and priests, know whether to retain a sin or forgive it? How would they know that? You have to hear it. You have to hear what the person is confessing. And then furthermore, in James chapter 5, it says, call the priests for the anointing of the sick and confess your sins, to one another. And the church has understood that to refer to priests who are given that authority by the bishop. Not every priest has the authority to absolve sins, except in an emergency. The bishop can or may not give that power to a priest. It's under the control of the bishop. Why? So that somebody who is incompetent does not get involved in hearing confessions. And there have been some cases of priests who put out, they didn't have permission, they just put out a shingle and caused a lot of mischief, or claimed to be priests when they weren't. So the bishop gives that kind of authority as a successor of the apostles. But we confess our sins so that distinction can be made between the sins that are forgiven and the ones that are retained. And that's something that's very important to keep in mind. Let's see here. I have a question about my church history. When my Chaldean church in Iraq started to follow the Catholic Church in Rome, and what reason for separation from the Assyrian Church? This is Arkan from Michigan. See, a lot of folks may not realize that the Chaldean Catholics had been at one time part of the Assyrian Orthodox Church, which still exists. And they wasn't, I think, just last century. I don't know the whole history of the reunion with Rome, but there were a lot of outreach to them, and they could see, especially in the region where they are, they needed to accept that help from the church in Rome, and they contribute to the church in Rome as well. All right, I got to take a break. That's why that music is.
Father Robert Spitzer.
First of all, you will get a much deeper awareness of your faith, much deeper awareness of the evidence for your faith, explanations of tough theological issues, how science and reason and faith come together, and above all, a deeper awareness of how to practice your faith and how to live it.
Father Spitzer's Universe with Father Robert Spitzer. Friday, 8 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Bishop Robert Barron.
Vatican II teaches that every baptized person is a participant in the threefold office of Jesus, which is priest, prophet, and king. So as priest, Christ is a sanctifier. He effects a reconciliation between divinity and humanity, right, by his great sacrifice on the cross. Every baptized person does indeed participate in that, in the measure that we all have that calling to reconcile divinity and humanity, to bring God to people and people to God. That's true of every baptized person. Vatican II further specifies that the ordained priesthood is different, not only in degree, but in kind. And it has to do with the identification between the ordained priest, I think, and the Mass, and a unique relationship to the sacraments. Every baptized person has a task of reconciling divinity and humanity. The ordained priest does it in this sort of heightened sacramental and Eucharistic way.
The people you know and trust are on EWTN.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question, call 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. Or send us an email to openline@EWTN.com.
All right. Great to be back with you. And let's now go over to Trevor, who's calling from, is it Frazee, Minnesota?
Sure.
Is that because it's cold, or is that somebody's last name?
I don't know why they call it Frazee, but...
Because I know it's freezing up there in a couple of months. Anyway, what can we do for you?
Well, I had a phone call the other day from an old friend that I hadn't heard in from a couple years. And she basically told me that any Catholic faith after Vatican II is basically going to go to hell.
Huh, ain't that something?
Well, see, I was born after Vatican II, and I regretfully have to say that I don't know much about Vatican II.
Yes.
And so I'm kind of wondering what rumors would have started this, because she said one thing was that in the Mass it got changed to forgive the sins for many versus the sins for all.
Mm-hmm.
And she said the wording. And I mean, what?
All right. Yeah, Trevor, let's start off with this. Your friend is partially educated too. What she is referring to, I remember this well. It was, they did experiment. You know, when you translate from one language to another, you're always dealing with an interpretation. What she does not know, and the reason, and I guarantee you, that she is angry about something. There's more than just that word. There's another kind of anger. And it's probably an anger that there were a lot of people in the church after the council who messed around with the liturgy, forgetting that liturgical abuse is a mortal sin if willfully done. And and so she's right to be angry at the foolishness that happened. But she needs to know more precisely what went on so she can approach this with a scalpel instead of a baseball bat. And was she born before the council?
What? She said she grew up during this, yes.
She grew up. So when was she born?
What was that now?
When was she born? How old is she?
Oh, I think she was born in the early 60s, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, so she didn't really know the pre-Vatican Church.
She just said that she recognized the changes.
She heard about the changes. She didn't recognize them. I'm old. I recognize the changes because I grew up in the 50s. I was born in the 40s and grew up in the 50s. And so I saw the changes. And I also read the documents. And one of the things where she has to keep in mind is, and I say this to motivate you to go and actually read the documents and not read or hear about them, which is what she's doing. The Vatican Council never said to translate the Mass into English. It said that you could use the modern languages, the vernaculars they call it, but Latin was to have pride of place. And neither she nor some of the people who were messing around with the liturgy read that. And it recommended that we continue to do the Kyrie in Greek and the Gloria, Sanctus, Credo, and Agnus Dei in Latin. That's in the Vatican II documents. It's in the Constitution on the Sacred Liturgy, Sacrosanctum Concilium. You can check that out for yourself. And if you don't have copies, Trevor, of the Vatican documents, you can go to EWTN.com and go to our library, our document library. And you'll see the area of councils. You can go to Vatican II, and you can download every single document from the council for free. And I urge you and everyone else to read what they actually say. Secondly, in terms of the change of the Mass, they did have a translation in English. The Latin of the Mass remained what it still is, that for the many. And I would agree that the person who mistranslated it made a mistake, and it should not have been approved. It was not an accurate translation. And it said, this is the cup of my blood for the forgiveness of sins of the many. That's what it says, but they said originally for all men. Well, that translation came out just as feminist sensitivity to male language was on the rise. And you had people say, you can't say for all men. What about us women? And so there was a lot of anger. And see, it was a dumb translation and or imprecise. Let me say that. It was an imprecise translation. I'll be nice. And then that led to people being upset. So then the priests saying Mass were starting to change it on their own for all. Some would say for all, some would say for all men and women, for all this, for all that, and on and on. Had they left it precisely as it should be for the many, then it would have been fine. That has been corrected. The bishops in this country, and again, this was a decision made by the bishops here. It was not a decision made in the Vatican Council. And we have to realize that there were misinterpretations of text and of the council documents. And we have to wade through the mistranslations and misinterpretations and go back to the text, see what it actually said, rather than the ideology. Look, and just so that she doesn't think it's any different, look at what politicians do with our Constitution, such that people today think that separation of church and state is in the Constitution, and it's not. It was in a Supreme Court decision by Justice Hugo Black, who was a former Ku Klux Klan member from here in Alabama, who was put on the Supreme Court, and he got over his rejection of black people, but he never got over his rejection and hatred for the Catholic Church. And so he really thought his whole life, even before Vatican II, he thought the Catholic Church was going to hell. But I will see how God takes care of that. But if people make that kind of mistake with our Constitution, which anybody can read and should, then of course you're going to have these other problems in reading church documents. All right, so I want you to take a look at that stuff, Trevor, and I'm going to go on to Lee, who is in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Lee, are you in the military yourself?
I was.
God bless you. Thank you. My own cousin, Dale, was over in that station there and was did all kinds of important work over the many years. God bless the whole of you folks that do that. What can we do for you today?
Father Mitch, my question is concerning the sheet that God let down and showed Peter.
Mm-hmm.
I got two questions on that subject. When the sheet was let down, that proved to Peter that the Gentiles was clean, right?
No. It wasn't about the Gentiles. It was proof that all of the animals that were considered unclean by Jews to eat were now edible. It just was about the animals. So that's why you, in the vision, you have this sheet lowered and all sorts of unclean animals. That would include lobster and shrimp and oysters and clams. Do you eat any of that stuff?
Some of it.
Yeah.
I want to.
But see, that's and also pigs and camels, other things. Those are all considered unclean animals, and he's told to take and eat, and because God's made it clean.
Okay. My first question is, don't that prove that animals go to heaven when the sheet came down and went back up?
No, it's not about that either. It's about them being able to be eaten, not that they're in heaven. Again, this is a vision. It's not something about what's in heaven. It's about what we can eat on earth. And in some ways, here's part of the way to understand it too. In Noah, they have all the animals in the ark, right? And he is allowed to eat the animals. And there is no prohibition against the unclean animals after the flood. That distinction of the clean and unclean animals does not occur until Moses receives those laws a few thousand years later. So that's what the sheet is about, is that we can go back to the rules from the days after the flood, after Noah, and that the Gentiles do not have to give up a ham sandwich in order to become a Christian. That's what it's about. It's not about the animals being in heaven.
And the other question I wanted to ask you is, when Peter was eating with the Gentiles, what was wrong with that, since the Gentiles is clean?
Right. See, this Paul was telling Peter that you can eat with the Gentiles, but Jewish tradition wouldn't allow it. They weren't allowed. As a matter of fact, that you could not eat off of plates that Gentiles had eaten from. And so some of the converts from the Pharisee party came up to Antioch and said, Peter, you better stop eating with those Gentiles. You're going to get Gentile cooties, or something along that line. And so he backed off. It was his weakness that was at stake. And St. Paul went to him and said, look, you've been eating with the Gentiles before. St. Paul lets him know, you've done this before. You can't stop now. You have to, exactly what you said, that the Gentiles are clean, and you can't start pretending that they aren't. And that's what he was getting on his case for. So he is correcting Peter in what was one more example of Peter's weakness. All right? That music means I got to go. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Please stay with us, and we'll get to Brian, Paul, and others.
Dr. Scott Hahn.
Jesus gave us the most perfect of prayers. It's always prayed by the Catholic Church after the consecration and right before communion, but always there at the climax of the Mass.
The leading Catholic voices are on EWTN Radio.
When Jesus was fasting in the desert, the devil tempted him to turn a stone to bread, to become king of the world, and to throw himself down from the temple and defy mortality. All that boiled down to a temptation to renounce his frail humanity. Jesus chose hunger, powerlessness, and mortality. We're tempted because of ego to renounce our humanity. The devil's first temptation to Adam and Eve was, you will become like gods. Ego can drive us to work to make a monument of accomplishments to ourselves. It drives us to earn more and more money because we think it makes us powerful. Drives us to obsess over the impact we make or how well known we become because we think that'll immortalize us. Give it up. There's a difference between you and God. God never thinks he's you. Do a gut check of those ways ego is driving your dreams. Because if it is, you're missing all that matters most. And your wife is probably missing that happy, carefree guy she married years ago. Send us a message at connect@reallifecatholic.com. This is Chris Stefanik from reallifecatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
EWTN, helping people grow in their love and understanding of God.
I just want to share that 5 years ago, my lovely warrior princess and saint of a wife and I decided to adopt a little girl through foster care. She is the perfect roundout of our family of 3 boys and her. Yes, there are challenges. Very grateful today for all the blessings that he has shown our family.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
I'm Gloria Purvis.
And I'm Deacon Harold. The Morning Glory team asks, what is the solution to the priest shortage?
Tomorrow morning, 7 Eastern. Now back to Open Line Wednesday with Father Mitch Pacwa.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question, call 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. Or send us an email to openline@ewtn.com.
All right, are we ready? Let's go on to another call. We have Paul from Dearborn, Michigan. How are you, Paul?
I'm doing good. Good afternoon, Father Mitch. I just want to clarify something. I'm kind of writing an outline for a book. And yeah, I make long story short, I do a lot of critical thinking and meditation and prayer and so forth.
Good.
Anyhow, my question specifically has to do with the Constitution of the United States. And it's founded on a pillar of 3. Natural law, Ten Commandments in the Bible, and there's Supreme Court rulings that back all this up. Anyhow, my question specifically is this. Why is not the Catholic Church, it seems so simple, any jurist, any politician who does not respect natural law, the Ten Commandments, nor the Judeo-Christian ethic, is unfit for public office or is unfit to be a jurist? We have all of this chaos in this country inside outside of the church. Specifically, and it's very simple, on these issues, and even on the sexual morality issue, if anyone were to ask any person and say any type of sexual activity outside the bonds of sacred marriage is disordered.
Well, here's, Paul, to find out why they don't say that, you're going to have to ask them. Because I have no idea why they don't. I think it's a good idea, like you do. And when bishops have done that, I have backed them up in public. But there are a lot who don't. And here's one of the things I do hear is to say, well, I don't want to be seen as telling people how to vote. Good, because this is something that we're seeing more and more, that if the church leaders tell people, in the name of the Lord, you have to vote this way, people will vote the opposite, just to say, nobody can tell me how to vote. That's the way people are. And now what's happened, it's kind of an odd thing. You have people in Hollywood who are taking the stance, if you don't vote against the natural law, then you are a bad person. Now, they don't put it quite that way, because I think too many of them are so ignorant of the natural law that they don't even know enough about it to say they're going against it. They just say, this isn't fair, and which is a watered-down form of natural law, and usually a poor application of it. But they, so Hollywood is saying, if you don't vote, the way we tell you to vote, then we're going to go after you. And they do. And now people are starting to say, you can't tell us what to do. So they're saying the same to the Hollywood people. Now, what does that leave us with? I think it would be extremely useful for more and more of the bishops and we priests in the parishes to help people think through the issues of the moral law. And so that you can say, now, I'm not telling you how to vote. And I do this on my broadcasts. That's a big part of my mission, is to help people work through this. And I've been on CNN defending one of the bishops who, told a politician, because you are contradicting the natural law in regard to the life of the unborn, that you may not receive Holy Communion. Well, CNN went into a tizzy. And quite frankly, they wanted to take me on a bad day for them. It was the wrong day for them to do that. They called me while I was gutting an 11-point buck, and I was in no mood for their namby-pamby, whiny arguments, including from a priest who was on there with me, rolling his eyes and stuff. Wrong day to try that stuff. I truly had blood on my hands. So don't mess. Deal with the real issues. And they haven't had me back since, which is fine. I don't need them. But we priests have to be out there doing that more, but also educating about natural law. And lay people like yourself, Paul, also have to do it, because there's so little thinking about the Constitution. You sound like you're someone who investigates what's in the Constitution and the other laws. I try to do the same and lay out the principles and let people think through those principles so that if they're going to contradict the natural law, A, they'll know they're doing so, and B, they need to know that they ought not to receive the sacraments if they're contradicting the natural law God places in our hearts and minds, especially our minds. Does that make sense, Paul?
Great answer, Father. I'm in complete agreement with you. God bless you. You're on. You just kind of. I hate to say, maybe it's a little bit of pride in me, but when anybody kind of agrees with how I'm thinking, I kind of think that, hey, I'm in a small boat. I think we're in a very small boat that think like this.
Yeah, well, you got to keep in mind, Paul, especially during World War II, that submarines were very small boats, but they sank some big ships. So don't get scared because it's a small boat. All right, let us now go over to Brian in wonderful St. Louis, Missouri. What's going on in St. Louis?
It's pretty good right now.
Good. Well, let's keep it that way.
Yeah.
What can we do for you here in Alabama?
You know, they have these discussions in these gender games we play now.
Yeah.
About, like, they hold up someone like a hermaphrodite, and they say, well, that shows that there is no such thing as gender. But so my question would be, how would you answer somebody who would say...
And I'm not laughing at the hermaphrodites. Nobody go crazy with that.
No, I know.
I'm laughing at the illogic.
I know. It's incredible, though. People don't think it all these days. But the point is, how do you explain to someone, when someone says that a man has a distinguished place in creation where he is the image and likeness of God, how do you tell them, how is he the image and likeness of God when God is spirit?
Here's where you say, aha, so it's not about the size of our body or its shape that makes us in the image and likeness of God. So now we have to free ourselves of only reducing the human to the animal level. That's something they won't want to stop doing. That was one of the key elements of people like Alfred Kinsey. He wanted to reduce human beings to animal behavior and therefore said all sexual activity is okay because we're just animals. Even though, some of the things that he advocated, I've been in the woods a lot. I've never seen animals do some of the stuff he was thinking about doing and recommending. So there's a lot of nonsense there on his part. But we then have to realize we don't reduce human beings to the animal level. And this is where those who want to use Darwin and other thinkers to reduce us to the animal level are going to miss the whole point. The point is that we're in the image and likeness of God in a way that the animals cannot be. In that, we have reason. We can think from point A to point B to point C and keep on going with that thought. That's why Darwin could do the research he did. None of the animals from Galapagos Islands have studied the origin of mankind. But a human being did study the development of those animals on Galapagos Islands. And in general, that is the case. We write books about the animals. They cannot write books about us or even about bananas or if they're apes and so on. They just don't. They can't. They can't reason. Secondly, because we can reason, and we can reason on the basis of knowledge and facts and not just react emotionally the way you see some people trying to do, then we can have a free will by which we make a choice based on reasoned thought about real information. That distinguishes us from the animals. They follow their instincts. We follow out of our instincts, but we can also go beyond them by making free will choices. Thirdly, we are able to have a type of love that is modeled by the Trinity, in which we can recognize the dignity inherent in other human beings and choose to give ourselves to them and they to us. Now, the animals are affectionate, especially the mammals. Mammals can be very affectionate. Sometimes their affections are ferocious. I wouldn't make friends with a Kodiak bear ever. Leave them alone. But I would I would befriend a dog, and we tend to make the dogs better by befriending them. But it's not an interpersonal communion with them. And we don't see them as equal to us in dignity. If it comes between the life of a baby or the life of a dog, we go for the baby's life and cherish that child because it's made in the image and likeness of God. It is given a dignity and freedom. And this is something that we recognize not only by faith, but even in our Declaration of Independence, that the Creator endowed us with rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So those are ways in which we are in the image of God. And to reduce us to the material is to beg the question on the basis of their materialistic view of the universe. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so it's reason, free will, and selfless love, right?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yep. All right. Let's now go over to Kathy, who's in Windsor, Colorado.
That's right.
Great. Good to have you. And
Thank
what can
you.
we do for you today?
Well, I've had a question because I heard a couple definitions for this, and I got confused because in Genesis 6 it talks about the sons of God and the daughters of men. Could you give me a specific definition for that?
Well, there's a good commentary that covers that. You might want to take a look at in more detail by Father Bruce Vawter, Vawter, and it's called On Genesis. One of the things that he points out is in some of the Canaanite temples, they saw references to the male prostitutes at the temples who were called the sons of the gods. And that they would be prostituting themselves to various women as a way for them to do fertility worship in Canaanite religion. So that's one kind of evidence. Does that help for at the outset?
Yeah.
And then secondly, have you ever read any Greek mythology? Ever read any of that? Hello?
I've heard about it.
Okay. I would urge you to read it. And you can get there are lots of different versions. Well, you don't have to read the originals, but you can take a look at some of the books about Greek mythology. Edith Hamilton is one of the classics. And you'll see there how many stories there are of the pagan gods impregnating human women. Isn't that the stories of Hercules and other people like that? That his father was a god, and it gets all very twisted and nasty. But those stories circulated around the Mediterranean world, not only in Greece and Rome, but elsewhere. And I'm pretty sure they go back to the late Bronze Age at least. I don't know about them earlier than that. Late Bronze Age would be from 1500 to about 1200 BC. And, roughly. And so you have those kind of stories then. And the Iliad and the Odyssey, especially the Iliad, has a lot of those. And all of that stuff was part of what people said, wow, Zeus had these kids with Europa and all this kind of thing. So that's the other part of it as well, that they were referring to some of these myths and the evils of the gods who would rape human beings. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Let us go to Cedric. Cedric, where are you from?
Basically around Grand Rapids.
Okay, sure. I know that area because my brother lives in southwestern Michigan, southwest of y'all. So what can we do for you?
So basically I'm doing some study on the doctrine of divine providence and sort of going in the area of divine predestination as well. And I've been reading some different people, and it seems like there's a consensus among the people I'm reading that St. Thomas Aquinas' understanding of predestination was very similar to people that we tend to think of as the predestinary, like Calvin and things like that. Now, obviously, he's going to disagree with Calvin on like assurance or double predestination,
right.
But it seems like there's a lot of overlap, and I'm just wondering, like, is this necessarily something that separates the doctrine of predestination? Is it necessarily separate Protestants and Catholics, or how do we think about
We
this?
lost you for a little bit. Are you saying that you're asking if this is something that necessarily separates Protestants and Catholics? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Yeah, because you dropped out. Here, a couple things. It depends on the Protestant and what they hold. If it is a strict Calvinist who insists on double predestination, that God predestines some people to hell and other people to heaven, and there's nothing you can do about it, it's irreconcilable. If your notion of predestination removes human free will, which is what it is, that the grace is there, the only thing you're free to do is choose which sin you commit, you have no free will, then you're also going to have something that is a breach. But you have a lot of Protestants, such as Billy Graham, for instance. Billy Graham taught in a way that was, he didn't really go into the speculative part. He was a preacher, and one of his great messages was, make a decision for Christ today. And people did, and they would walk down that trail. Now, that doctrine would be very much consonant with, Thomas's teaching, because one of the presuppositions for the whole Catholic approach is from St. Paul's letter to Timothy, where it says, God wills all men to be saved. If God wills all men to be saved, he is going to somehow make it possible for everybody to be saved. They'll all have that opportunity. The Calvinists rejected that. But later on, a lot of the Baptists, for the most part, depending on who they were, but for the most part, they rejected Calvin and came back to a more Catholic point of view on that. Now, they would differ in some other areas, but there is room for that kind of conversation among Protestants who are not strict Calvinists, and there is a basis upon which we can work. And in general, the strict Calvinists are very, very few. There aren't many of them left because it's just too hard to maintain. So they don't. But, I think that's a good start. Does that help?
Okay. Mind if I ask a follow-up or not enough time?
It depends how quick. Real quick.
All right. So then are you saying, because my understanding was that St. Thomas said that God gives grace, to certain people and not to other people. And so, therefore, those to whom God chooses not to give grace are, of their own fault, not damned, and those to whom he does give grace are by a gift of...
I want to... Do you remember where that was? I tell you what, Bill, because I don't have time to look at it right now. I want to see the text and see what the context of what he's saying there. So look that up and send an email to openline@ewtn.com, and we'll get to that, okay? All right, let me now go to Margaret in Utica, New York. How are you, Margaret?
I'm good, Father Mitch. Thank you.
Good.
I am calling to ask you, I have a teen in my life, a 15-year-old.
Bless your heart.
2 days ago, the teen was asked if he had done something, and he promised with all his heart and soul that he did not. Mm-hmm. And as the day went on and later on in the day, he swore to God that he did not. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day... And then he did.
Okay.
And so, I've told him he's going to confession, but I want to know if there's anything else.
No, well, do you have soap? A good mouthful of that isn't a bad idea. And then here's the other thing I would... Sorry. That was my mother's approach. But another good thing to do is to sit down with him in a calm moment. Not out of, in the punishing mode, certainly not in anger, but to sit down, is his dad around?
Yes.
Good. Both you sit down with him and say, look, you swore to God. You promised that you were telling the truth, and you weren't. Why are you doing this? You're not smart enough to get away. I'm smarter than you are. I'm going to stay that way because I'm older. You're not good at lying. And you're bringing God into this in a way that is not good for you. What are you going to do about this, boy? I would have a serious conversation with them and let them know that you have to be, you just can't do this. But ask him to explain why you're swearing to God when you're telling a lie. And ask him to talk about that. Okay?
Be talking and playing with your soul. You don't say things like that.
That's exactly. Oh, I know what. Make him watch Man for All Seasons and see what an oath is about. That's a great movie. All right, let me go to Olivia in Dallas, Texas. Hello, Olivia.
Hey, Father, real quick.
Yes.
Gender ideology. What's the problem with it? We got this trial going on here in Dallas right now about the 6-year-old boy whose mother will make him a girl if his dad loses him in the trial, and his dad's a good Catholic man, apparently.
Oh, the problem is that it sounds to somebody from outside like child abuse. To make a decision based on what a 6-year-old wants. When I was 6, I really, really, really wanted a pony. You know why we didn't get one? We lived in a house trailer. I had no sense at all. That was a ridiculous request. And it took a lot of years because I kept asking for that horse. I really wanted him. But there was no way we could have a horse in a house trailer. I thought he could eat the grass in front of the door. No. Now, you don't let a decision, you have to follow and wait for a child to grow up and help him to mature and think through things because, his body is what it is and you have to understand it. And then you don't make anything that's nonsensical. All right. Lord bless you all and keep you, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. See you tonight. Have a great show about the radio and great hosts that we have on it.
This is Al Cresta. Let Scripture and the truth of the Catholic Church guide you with today's issues. Cresta in the Afternoon is next on most of these EWTN stations.
The Morning Glory team, you heard us on the radio. Now see us on TV with Father Mitch Pacwa, who, by the way, is my mentor, my professor, and a man who knows more languages than Duolingo.
If you like what you're hearing, boy, you're going to